Welcome to the 2021 Milton Speaks Candidates Forum series. My name is Michael Lynch, Executive Director for Milton Access TV, and I will act as tonight's moderator. This year, we are hosting the annual Candidates Forum over a series of nights in March and April leading up to the election, taking place on Tuesday, April 27th. Tonight is our final forum, and we will hear from the school committee candidates. The candidates were contacted through the town clerk's office as well as Milton Access TV for participation in these forums. Candidates were not provided the questions or subject matter before tonight's debate. Tonight's questions will be directed towards all candidates. No individual questions will be asked. Tonight's questions will be asked by Ms. Elaine Carroll of the Milton Times and Mr. Ralph Destin and Mr. Jonathan Waldman, both senior captains of the Milton High School debate team. We also solicited questions from the public, to which we did receive a few. If you don't hear your question being asked, it may be part of another question or a repeat question from another member of the press panel. Now, the format for tonight's forum. Each candidate will be allowed a 90-second opening statement. Questions of the candidates will then be asked by members of the panel. Each candidate will be allowed a 90-second response to each question. The order of the first question will be alphabetical by last name, and the order will change for each subsequent question. There will be a 1-minute closing statement offered to each candidate, and the order will be chosen randomly. There will be no rebuttals. I will signal the candidates when they have 15 seconds remaining to wrap up their answer. I ask that you finish your thoughts at that time and bring your response to a close. Tonight's forum will feature school committee candidates. They are Ms. Elizabeth Carroll, Ms. Beverly Ross Denny, Ms. Suzanne Haggerty, and Ms. Kristen Kosiel. Each candidate was asked to submit a brief bio to be read this evening, which I will do now, starting with Ms. Carroll. Dr. Elizabeth Lizzie Carroll is the mom of 2 daughters, a first grader and a rising preschooler at Tucker, where she is an active volunteer. She represents Precinct 3 in town meeting. Lizzie and her husband James chose Milton for its great schools, unique diversity, and vibrant community life. Having begun her career as a high school English teacher in New York City and then in her hometown of Boston, she now brings over 15 years of educational leadership experience across K-12, university, and nonprofit settings. She graduated from Dartmouth College and earned her doctorate in education policy and administration from Harvard Graduate School of Education's Urban Superintendent's Program, where her research focused on teachers' union and collective bargaining. Lizzie led the creation of a regional STEM high school through a public-private partnership, and she was the founding director of Educational Studies program at Yale University. Lizzie currently serves as the program director at the nonprofit Facing History and Ourselves, where she leads a team that supports 4,000 educators throughout New England. She's running for school committee with a commitment to innovation and equity. The next candidate is Ms. Beverly Ross Denny. Beverly and her husband Greg moved to Milton 12 years ago because of the quality of the schools and the diversity of the community. Their 3 children are enrolled in each level of the Milton Public Schools. Beverly brings 15 years of professional experience in her education reform with a proven track record of establishing policies and practices that transform instructional settings and school systems all over the country and abroad. She brings 2 unique perspectives to her work from both private and public sectors. Prior to her experience in public education, she led a successful career in the private sector, working with Deloitte & Touche Consulting and the Microsoft Corporation. She's a graduate of the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, and she has an MBA from Harvard Business School. Beverly has volunteered in the Milton Public Schools for almost a decade, serving in the site councils at Glover, Tucker, and Pierce, schools sharing research-based practices in education, as well as her national network of practitioners. She's also currently serves as the district strategic planning committee. Beverly is the leader of her daughter's Girl Scout troop and established Milton's first National Society of Black Engineers junior chapter for the middle and high school students interested in STEM. She believes it would be an honor to serve on the Milton School Committee, working with current members in the broader Milton community. Our next candidate is Ms. Susanna Haggerty. Susanna is the parent of 5 children, 4 in the Milton Public Schools at Collycott, Pierce, and Milton High School. She has 20 years experience as a union lawyer and has worked the past 12 years at the Massachusetts Nurses Association, advocating and negotiating on behalf of nurses. She serves on the Warrant Committee and the Milton Public Schools Facilities Committee and has volunteered in the schools in various roles throughout her children's education. And our next candidate is Ms. Kristen Kosiel. Kristen's experience with the Milton Public Schools is both as a parent and a former student. She moved back to Milton with her family 9 years ago. She has 2 children in the Milton Public Schools, a daughter at the Glover and one at the Pierce. She went to Boston College and works as an outpatient cardiac nurse at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Kristen has been involved in the community as a room parent, faith formation teacher, village school board member, and most recently as an advocate for a full in-person model for the students of Milton Public Schools. A school committee represents the voice of the children of the community. Kristen will be that voice, and she will offer a fresh perspective as someone outside the world of education as we work to address the serious issues facing our district. And now, let's begin the forum. We will start with our opening statements. Ms. Carroll, we will begin with you. You have 90 seconds.
Good evening, and thank you so much, Mike, the panelists, and my fellow candidates. And thank you to all of you for tuning in tonight. We all recognize that we're coming out of the most challenging year for education that our community has ever faced. The stakes are high, and we have many opportunities before us. We must proactively plan to recover from the academic and mental health gaps this pandemic has exposed, confront our student enrollment issues, and make much needed progress to become more equitable and inclusive. We have a new superintendent who's setting a vision for our schools, and this new school committee will partner to write the next chapter of our children's future. We need experienced leadership committed to building on our school's strengths through innovation. I'm running on 3 priorities in an aligned platform with Beverly Ross Denny. First, let's advance excellence and equity for all students through academics, extracurriculars, and social emotional well-being. Next, we will integrate community voice into an even more transparent decision-making process. Finally, let's secure sustainable funding in a fiscally responsible way with accountability to meet our goals. My approach to serving on the school committee will be collaborative and pragmatic, with evidence-based problem solving that thinks outside the box. I'm running for school committee to apply my educational leadership experience to strengthen all of our kids' schools. And I'm eager to discuss some of the ways we can do that tonight. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Ms. Carroll. Next candidate for an opening statement is Ms. Beverly Ross Denny. Ms. Denny.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to introduce myself to the Milton community. And tonight, I hope to earn your vote. If I'm elected to school committee, I plan to share my 15 years of experience in public education reform, as well as my collaborative research-based approach to addressing the district's greatest challenges. I'm currently the managing director with Grantmakers for Education, where we work with over 260 foundations nationwide that invest in education. I'm responsible for finance, accounting, and member services. While my passion for education is evident, my career started quite differently. I made the transition into education after many years of volunteering in schools and realizing that I wanted to help the most vulnerable and marginalized students. My first opportunity to do so was with the Boston Public Schools in teaching and learning. I then became the Deputy Director for Human Resources. After leaving the Boston Public Schools, I spent several years working for organizations that provide professional development for teachers, as well as coordinating student support services to help the most marginalized students and ensure that their social emotional needs were met. For almost a decade, I've served on site councils at the Glover and the Tucker at the Pierce in order to share what I've learned. And if I'm elected to school committee, I promise to do the same for all of our students. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Our next opening statement will come from Ms. Hegarty. Ms. Hegarty, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you, and thanks everybody who's mustering the interest to tune into this tonight. I do think it's an important election, and I hope that everybody will turn out to vote, and you know, in that matter, we'll share your thoughts on who should be in charge of the next set of goals and processes for our schools. And I think you have some excellent candidates to select from. I come to the school committee election. I came to be a candidate mainly in my role as a parent. I was inspired to run for a school committee in the wake of the last year's educational debacle as managed by our current school committee, and really was inspired to become involved when I looked around and saw what a poor job the hybrid model was doing for our students. I talked to families and other parents across Milton who were struggling with their students' online learning and the complicated schedule and their work responsibilities, and really we're finding huge levels of disappointment in the handling of the pandemic learning by our current school committee. Oh my gosh, 15 seconds, I did not talk fast enough. I believe that the school committee needs fresh blood. I believe the school committee needs candidates whose thinking doesn't fall into line with the current school committee members. And I believe that with my experience and my perspective, I could bring that fresh perspective to the committee. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Hagerty. And our next opening statement comes from Ms. Kristen Kosiel. Ms. Kosiel, you have 90 seconds.
Okay. I want to thank Milton Access Television for hosting this evening, the Milton High School debate team, and all our moderators for taking the time to participate in the event. Lizzie, Beverly, and Susanna, thank you for your dedication to Milton and our schools by showing your willingness to serve on the school committee. The school committee's role is to represent community voice in our schools and to make sure that we offer the best possible education to our children. This includes giving them the additional support they need to succeed and making sure they feel happy and motivated to come to school each day. The teachers have the support of a strong union that represents their best interests. The role of the school committee is to represent the children's best interests. I think that is why it's important to have the perspective of stakeholders with a diverse background represented on the committee. In the context of COVID-19, it is hugely important to have a medical professional focused on keeping our children safely in their classrooms. I aim to proactively address the serious issues facing our district, such as overcrowding, learning loss, and the social emotional needs of our children when they return to their classrooms. We live in a highly residential tax-based town that is looking to put up a fire station and a school building project in our near future, fighting over scarce resources. I'll make sure the money spent by the school is focused on the children. We need to make sure the children have access to the supports that they need, whether that's academic, social, emotional support, or affordable access to extracurriculars. I'll listen to parents and residents to understand what we're doing right and areas for improvement, and I'll aim to rebuild the trust that many parents lost in our schools this past year. I hope to earn your vote this evening on April 27th. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Kosiel. And now let's get to the questions. Our first question will be asked by Mr. Ralph Destin of the Milton High School debate team, and we address first to Ms. Carroll. Mr. Destin, your question, please.
Thank you. Milton has historically failed to invest adequately in academic extracurricular activities such as the debate team when compared to public schools in towns such as Lexington and Newton. In recent years, there have been proposals to cut club funding even further. How do you plan to promote extracurricular involvement in our schools and ensure stable funding for these programs to ensure they are accessible to all interested MPS students?
Thank you so much, Ralph. That's a great question. And it actually speaks directly to the first priority of the platform that I mentioned, which Beverly and I are running on. When we talk about advancing equity and excellence for all students in academics, extracurriculars, and social emotional well-being, extracurriculars is right in there. It's so key. Especially, I think, after this past year, when we know that a lot of, basically all of you young people have, been isolated from your peers, have not been able to engage in extracurriculars the way that you would have wanted to or were able to before. It's so important that we continue investing and making those opportunities available to everybody who wants them. So you're asking about how to provide access. I mean, one thing that I'm really interested to start with is seeking the input from you and your fellow students. That's about community voice. That's the second priority of our platform. What extracurriculars do you want to see that you don't currently have? What are the extracurriculars that are over enrolled where we need to provide more capacity? When it comes to funding, let's seek ways to partner with others in the community to make sure that we can provide access to anybody who wants it. We've had conversations with Parks and Rec, for example. How can we make sure that we're using all the empty building space that's available after school hours? There's so much that we can do, and the funding, that's things that we can find when we have strategic priorities. That would be a strategic priority for us. And I would look forward to working together with the community to explore how we can make that happen. Thanks for the question.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Next, Ms. Denny, you have 90 seconds.
I completely agree with Lizzie. It is really important that we provide recreational opportunities for our students in an equitable way so that no one is left out. We have to ensure that every student has the opportunity to engage in meaningful activities outside and inside of school. And I do believe that we can do this in partnership with the town so that we don't have to solely rely on the resources limited to the school building. And as Lizzie mentioned, we've spoken with Parks and Rec already about using excess facilities, but I think the crux of the point that you're making is, what about the funding? Where is the money going to come from that will allow these programs to happen? And I think it's really important that we have an honest conversation in our town about the fact that we have a structural deficit. We have lower commercial property than other towns, but we're limited by Proposition 2.5. We also have 3 large nonprofits that are seeping funds away from the tax base. I think it's important that we form a commission with representatives from across the town's communities, whether it's the select board, the planning board, as well as the warrant committee and the school committee. And the point is, I would love them to project 3 to 5 years out. What would funding look like, or what would it need to be in order to fully fund our schools and the programmings that our students need? And with that said, I would want a cross-department plan that shows a mix of revenue, increasing more, having more commercial property, trying to get more payments in lieu of taxes to support the schools. And then lastly, if necessary, that we honestly talk to our community about getting an override, because we will not be able to achieve the schools that we want if we don't actually want to pay for it. So it was a very good question, Ralph. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Denny. Next, Ms. Haggerty, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Thanks, Ralph. My daughter joined the Milton High School debate team this year as a freshman, and she's really enjoyed learning from all of you older and more experienced debaters. So thanks for that too. I actually am aware already of the activities that are oversubscribed and those that are underfunded. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience through this on the warrant committee. I have advocated over the past several years, every time that the school committee has come to the warrant committee with either cuts to the budget for extracurricular activities or in request for additional. In each of those cases, I've been one of the few people who's advocated for the priority and the importance of keeping these extracurricular activities, or where necessary, expanding them. I didn't focus on equity in my advocacy because, as far as I know, those activities and the ability to participate in them is already equitable. Anyone can join, and if finances are an issue, then there are processes in place to address that. But I do believe that money and those requests need to come through the school committee to the warrant committee and then to the town meeting. Our current school committee has failed to advocate for those additional dollars. To the point that I recently asked at a warrant committee meeting this year to the school committee in their presentation, please ask us for more money if you need it for these vital services. So I, as a school committee member, would prioritize this as opposed to the current school committee. I would ask for the money that was necessary in order to keep these services robust and available. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Haggerty. And Ms. Kosiel, you have 90 seconds.
Ralph, thank you so much for your question. And I completely agree that, having these extracurricular activities is so important. And it's a way for all students to feel, beyond the classroom, that they are welcomed and a member of our school community. And, children thrive through, different aspects, whether that's sports, programs such as the debate. And I agree that, we need to fight at a town level for the funding. An example of this could be a town meeting when the town put money back in the stabilization fund. That would have been an opportunity for the school committee to have advocated that, no, we need this money. We need it now. We need it to help get the children back in the classroom or whatever funding. So I am also on the ballot for town meeting, and I plan to advocate for any funding that we can for our children. And I think townwide we do need to look at the reality that we're a residential tax-based town, and still fight to offer the same amount of programs as districts such as Lexington, Westwood, and really give our students all the opportunities that the surrounding communities have, and all the opportunities to thrive in our schools, whether it be in school or outside of the classroom. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Cosio. Our next question will be coming from Mr. Waldman, and we address to Ms. Denny first. So, Mr. Waldman, your question, please.
Alrighty, thank you. So pretty basic question. How do you plan to ensure the safe opening of schools going forward, particularly as a new school year begins?
That's a really good question, because as we know, there are variants to the virus, and we can't control what's going to happen as the winter comes, because we know that there'll likely be an increase in cases if the vaccinations that the faculty and staff, and more than likely many of the students would have received, will be effective. I'm a proponent of testing at the schools, whether it's pool testing or testing that families have access to, and they show some sort of evidence that their child is safe to participate in school. I really do appreciate the fact that for the students that were participating in the hybrid program, the district only shut down in entirety if there was so many cases that they were concerned that it could balloon in the district. That's a responsible way to make sure that we can keep our schools open as long as possible in the midst of any surges. And being able to isolate the students or the teachers when there's too many students in one classroom that have to socially distance they have to isolate because either are a presumptive case or a diagnosed case was a very prudent way to ensure that when we only had a few cases that we didn't shut the entire district down. I have not heard of any models that were that proactive, but I appreciate the fact that the goal of the schools were to keep the administration was to keep the schools open as long as possible.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Denny. Ms. Hegarty, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. I love this question because this is how I got involved in this race in the first place. I work with nurses, and I've spent the last year advocating for safe working conditions for nurses during a pandemic. And here we're talking about people who actually take care of COVID patients on a daily basis. So we have worked through processes for nurses who had family members who were at risk to avoid COVID patients. We have worked out leave policies. We have worked on all of those things. So one of the things that I would do is I would make those policies available to teachers. So if we had teachers who are uncomfortable being in the classroom due to their own or their family members' vulnerabilities, comorbidities, I would make sure that they were able to work remotely and make sure that they were protected. In terms of the kids going back to school, I would take a shocking turn, which the school committee has refused to do, and I would look at the actual science. The science that says, here are the circumstances under which it's safe for kids to be in school. The science that says there's very low transmission rates in the classroom if masking and social distancing is maintained. The school committee did not do this year, and as a result of that, we are facing the social and academic repercussions for our kids of having been in a catastrophic hybrid model for nearly a year of school. So I would focus on the science, and I would draw on my own experience working with nurses during the pandemic to ensure that everybody was safe in the buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hegarty. Ms. Cosio, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you again for this question. And, I find it particularly relevant as a nurse and also as a mother of a childhood cancer survivor. This was not a decision I took lightly when I sent my child to school. I consulted with her physicians at the Jimmy Fund to make sure that it was safe. And I was told the unsafe thing would be to keep her home. And I agree. When Pierce pivoted to remote 4 times, it rocked my child's world. It was unsustainable for 2 working parents. We didn't have tutors. We didn't have my children in a pod. And the people who need to guide this are the experts. We are very lucky to have experts that live in town, and we need to use them to build a plan, not only for next year, but for this year. And, proactive planning is how we're going to do it. I think when I sent my daughter, when we finally got a full return at Pierce, I didn't know one of the places that she'd be eating lunch was on the floor in the hallway, potentially. We need to, invest in tents or outdoor seating for next year because COVID is not going anywhere. Thankfully, there are the vaccine, and I believe they're working on boosters for the new variants. And we need to do everything we can to make sure we keep these schools open. And the only time we should shut down is if there is community spread. And that was never publicly revealed that there was any evidence of community spread. So public health experts need to be at the table when we make the decisions for next year.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Cosile. And next is Ms. Carroll. Ms. Carroll, you have 90 seconds.
Sure. So I agree with Bev and Kristen and Susanna. This is obviously the first priority of the new school committee coming in, is to hit the ground running with planning proactively for how we are completing this year safely, but really how are we looking ahead to next fall? What are we putting in place that we haven't had the opportunity to do this year while everything has been going on in real time? The summer is, a huge opportunity to get our ducks in a row and make sure that we come back to school ready, not just for the safety, which is what I'll talk about here, but of course also to address the learning loss, the mental health challenges that have been piling up over the past year as well. So I agree with Bev. I would really like to look at, how we can think about testing within our schools, within the community. That seems like an important thing that, we're not doing right now. I want to have a transparent conversation as a school committee. How are we spending our CARES Act funding? What is that going to? I know that we're putting some of that towards the summer program, but what are the other things that we're looking at? Can we have another conversation about the ventilation in our buildings? That's something I haven't heard us talking about recently, along with the tents that Kristen mentioned. What infrastructure needs do we have that we need to address for next fall? And then finally, thinking about being nimble and being prepared to maintain a fully remote option if necessary for children and families who require that option. I think those are some of the things, in addition to other points mentioned, that I hope we will definitely be considering in the coming weeks.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Our next question will come from Ms. Elaine Carroll at the Milton Times and will be addressed first to Ms. Haggerty. Ms. Carroll, your question, please.
What do you feel is the best course to address overcrowding in the schools in the short term and the long term? And then there's a second part. Under what circumstances and for which projects would you support a potential Proposition 2.5 override?
Thank you. That's okay. Now I'm unmuted, right? Thank you. I appreciate the question. We've talked about this in the warrant committee for several years. And I think it's probably always a topic hanging over people's head. And I also have been lucky enough to sit on the facilities committee of the Milton Public Schools, which has examined the data in great detail over the past couple of years in terms of our increasing elementary enrollment and the information from the consultant, which has shown us what that curve is likely to look like. More and more people are moving to Milton. They're moving to Milton because they have young families and they want excellent schools, which is great, but they also are overloading our capacity, which is a nice problem to have, except when it comes to funding. That's a long way of saying I'm supportive of an override to build a new school building. I think that's a jump ahead. I think that nobody likes to talk about it. I think the school committee has a lot of work to do in terms of transparency and outreach to the community before that can happen, because I think we have a large population of people in this town whose children who don't necessarily have children directly in the schools right now, who are not necessarily in favor of throwing money at the problem. And I think that's in part because of an inherent distrust in the school committee and the way that their finances have been handled. So I would increase transparency, reach out to the community, but I am in favor of an override, because I do think that we will need a new school building as soon as we can get one, which isn't going to be soon enough. And I didn't talk enough about the interim measures because I ran out of time, but I think that in order to prevent the loss of art rooms and music rooms and teachers sharing classrooms and revolving around the high school with a cart full of their materials, I think we need to talk about some temporary buildings. No one's excited about that, but I think we need to address the problem in the short term as well as in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haggerty. Ms. Kosiel, you're next. You have 90 seconds.
Okay, thank you. And I want to clarify, I meant we should, in my previous question, schools should only shut down for in-school transmission, not community spread. We need to exclude community spread. But overcrowding is something I'm very interested in. I actually worked at Town Hall in high school when we went through the initial school building process and saw our town 2 failed overrides. We didn't get our schools. So, we need to proactively address this issue. And I think the space, 3 feet spacing of COVID highlights how important it is, because we need to make sure every student has a desk when they are ready to return to Milton Public Schools. And we can't fit 100% of our students back. I think really the answer is looking at how many people we did lose students to private school. And I know we're losing students next year to private school. So I think really looking at our enrollment and seeing, what we can, if we could perhaps, make use of space, say at Milton Academy, ask them if, they have extra space for some of their remote students next year, and really engaging with the community to see if there's any temporary solutions that we could find, such as that. And, long term, I am supportive of a new elementary school, and, that is going to have to go to an override. And if you look, for example, my daughter, who's in 7th grade, last year, they didn't have enough room in the cafeteria for the students to sit at. And so that is something my 4th grader is in. Her class size is one of the largest in the district. And we need to make sure that those kids in the 4th grade have somewhere to sit in the cafeteria when they're at Pierce in 2 years.
Thank you, Ms. Kosiel. Ms. Carroll, your response?
Thank you. So this issue of the school overcrowding is actually what motivated me in the first place to run for town meeting, because I wanted to understand how our budget worked in town and how our schools fit into that. I wanted to sort of understand the plan for the short term, medium, long term, with young children who, are part of this enrollment trend. So it's definitely, as Susanna and Kristen were just laying out, it's a very important issue and will be a priority for the school committee. It already has been. They gave a detailed presentation within the past few months that laid out the plans for next year, the year after that, and the year after that, in terms of how they would use spaces within existing buildings and then move toward the addition of modular spaces. These are the short-term solutions, which I agree with their planning seem to be as cost-effective and tailored to our needs as possible within our budget constraints. But 100%, we have to build a 5th elementary school. The school building committee did their due diligence, and that is the clear answer. So I do agree with Susanna and Kristen that we will be talking about an override to build that school. And it will take a school committee that is sort of reaching out, having conversations all over town, and sort of helping everybody imagine together, what kind of future do we want for our kids in Milton, and how can we maintain the excellent quality of life that we have here in this town, which is so tied to the excellence of our schools, And in order to maintain that, we do need to accommodate this growth in the student population. So it's definitely something that will be a top priority for the next 3 years for any of us who are elected.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Carroll. And Ms. Denny, you have 90 seconds.
No, I agree with what Lizzie said. We spent a lot of time talking to families, and I was surprised at how many people weren't aware of the enrollment crisis. And the only way we're going to maintain the quality of instruction that our students deserve and what our families expect is to ensure there's adequate classroom space for our teachers to do the excellent job that they are doing and to continue to do it in a safe setting, given what we have going on with the pandemic. As Lizzie mentioned, several weeks ago, the school committee laid out a plan that talked about principals at each of the elementary schools identifying spaces that can be converted to classrooms. They anticipate in the fall of 2021 that two to three of those spaces will come online to support the additional increase in students. In the fall of 2022, the remaining 2 to 3 spaces will be brought online. And in year 3, they anticipate bringing in modular classrooms. And the point is, after 3 or 4 years, it should have bought the district enough time to secure a building and have it constructed. The district is in the process of going through a state review in order to get funds from the state to pay for that additional building. Milton has made the short list, and if we're successful, even if we need an override, Milton will not bear the entire cost of building this additional school. I think the important point in this goes back to Lizzie and my platform, which emphasizes the importance of community voice in this decision. We have to make sure that families are well informed of what our options are so that they're included in the decision making as it relates to bringing these additional spaces online, bringing in modular classrooms, and ultimately the design, configuration, and enrollment of this new elementary school. It's very important that we prioritize in an override, in addition to our space, the needs of the special education population in Milton, which has ballooned to over 719 students, up, I think it's over 20% in the last 5 years. I would also prioritize with an override equity so that we ensure that our students are getting what they need, whether it's additional supports or opportunities to be challenged. But I think it's important that we recognize that there's an array of issues for which an override can help address. We just have to ensure that the next school committee makes them a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Denny. Our next question is a question that was actually submitted via our website from a member of the public. The next question is, what do you know about Milton's special education, and how are you planning to make better special education services across different schools in Milton? Ms. Kosiel, you have the first response and you have 90 seconds.
So what I know about Milton's special education program is, not from a parent perspective. I don't have a child who is in the special education program. So it's more through community outreach that I have, done my homework and learned about it. And also I'm lucky that my brother and sister are both in special education. So, I can ask them if, things that happen in our district, just advice about that. So one thing about the special education program that I would hope that we could improve on is how much our children are pulled out of their classrooms to receive services. I wish that some of the services, whether it be OT, could be offered in the class. And I think this is going to be a particularly relevant issue that a lot of kids weren't given access to the supports that they needed this year. And, kids are going to have a hard time returning to the classroom, and we need to do everything we can to make them feel comfortable and reduce the stigma while also offering that support that they need. And I also think that, moving forward, if there was a way we could think creatively to make sure that less children are require out of district placements, whether that be proactively offering support or thinking creatively to keep them in our schools, because these are children who are also members of our community. And even if that's, making sure that they're including extracurriculars as well, we just need to make sure that we adequately fund special education and reduce the stigma of the children of the program.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Kosiel. Ms. Carroll, your response?
Thank you. Yeah, we had a great conversation about this actually a week ago tonight at a candidate forum hosted by the CPAC. And, a few of the issues that came up in that forum are obviously relevant for answering this question. One thing I would think about is the stability of the team that delivers special education services to children in Milton. So we know that there's been substantial turnover in this team over recent years. And the school committee needs to work together with the administration of Milton Public Schools to stabilize that team, because we know that the consistency of relationships is so important for families and children. So that is one thing, working with Susan Maselli to make sure that she has the resources that she needs, that her team at the different schools have the resources they need, and growing out of that to make sure that our educators are trained with the support that they need to make sure that their students with special education, their students with IEPs, are able to be met where they are able to be supported and challenged. Having been a teacher, knowing what it's like to teach students with IEPs without proper training, I know how important that is. I'm also thinking about the things that we are doing well in Milton, like our integrated preschool program. How can we take examples like that and expand them and make them more accessible? Our unified high school track program, let's get that back up and running when it's safe to do so and expand it so that we can create that sense of belonging for students, including our students on IEPs and 504s who may require those different accommodations to be successful. So there's definitely a lot we can do. We're lucky to have a really passionate and engaged group of parents in this district. And as a member of school committee, I would partner with them to make sure that we're able to address their needs.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Ms. Denny, you have 90 seconds.
The issues that are facing Milton and special education mirror what we're seeing in national trends, which reflects the fact that there's a growth in students that need these services, but there's also the opportunity to ensure that their needs are being met. Milton has a series of dedicated educators, but as Lizzie mentioned, there's been significant turnover at the administrative level. And until we can stabilize that role by first identifying what is it that's causing people to leave and sharing that with the larger community, especially the CPAC community, then we can begin to resolve that issue. We have to make sure that our students feel like they belong and that they're included in additional opportunities. They shouldn't feel socially isolated. They shouldn't feel invisible in our schools. We need to ensure that those students are placed in the least restrictive environment, but also have the opportunity to fully engage in the school community. I also realize that because we have an increased enrollment in special education students at the elementary level, we're very fortunate that we do have an inclusion model. But I think we need to name what that inclusion model should look like by first forming a committee of both educators and families to look at what are the best practices related to special education inclusion settings, and then benchmark our performance against that so we can move towards having an inclusion setting that reflects what we all believe is what's best practice for our students. But we also need to have the professional development for those teachers that are in those classrooms where there isn't a second special education teacher. When you start getting to the middle and the high school level, our teachers are now responsible for a significant portion of the student population, but they may not necessarily have the resources in the classroom or the professional development to support such a diverse set of needs. Milton will need to raise the funds necessary or allocate the budget necessary to ensure that we can provide an equitable instructional environment, as well as address the needs that we've been cited for by the state, because we have an increased number of students of color that are being identified for special education that far outpace what we're seeing for the other students. And if we don't address the needs of students of color, in addition to the expectations of families of special needs students, I think Milton will have a tough road ahead. But I do believe that we can do this work because between the administration and the families of these students, they're dedicated to seeing improvements.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Denny. That was completes round one of questioning, and now on to round two. The next question will come from Mr. Destin and will be addressed to Ms. Carroll first. Mr. Destin, your next question.
Thank you. On a similar, in recent months, especially, the district has received pushback from the Milton Educators Association and teachers on policy decisions regarding the reopening of schools. How do you plan to center the voices of teachers and educators if elected and ensure their needs are met?
Thank you, Mr. Dustin. And Ms. Carroll, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you so much. So as a former teacher, I sincerely appreciate this question. I completely agree that we do need to listen to our teachers and educators. We need to support them. We have high expectations of them, and we need to be in that conversation together as partners. So in terms of how we can do that, Bev and I have talked about this community voice in decision-making. And for us, that includes educators as well. I would look forward to partnering with the MEA for sure. As Mike mentioned, I have a background in collaborative bargaining and looking at ways that school district administrations and teacher unions can engage in win-win negotiations where everybody benefits through that. But in terms of how we can create even more this culture of mutual respect and clear and transparent communication, that is all about that second priority of our platform. I think that we need classroom teachers on the school committee, former classroom teachers, people who understand the needs and concerns. And furthermore, my professional work for the past many years has been in providing professional development to teachers. So I also am familiar with the best practices in our field for how we can approach adult development to make sure that teachers are getting their needs met. If we understand from teachers what those needs are, and we set sort of expectations for benchmarks, as Bev was talking about, then I am really confident that we can continue to make progress, whether we're talking about equity, inclusion, any number of the issues that we're talking about trying to move forward on.
Great, thank you. Ms. Hagerty, you have 90 seconds.
Mike, I think you forgot to let me answer the special ed question, but that's okay.
Okay.
That's okay. I'll answer this one now. I just wanted to say I didn't not notice. So that's fine.
I do apologize for that. I will let you get your response in after this.
No, it's totally fine. I just wanted to not to seem like I wasn't paying attention. So I completely understand. So with regard to the teachers, this is my profession. I'm a professional union side negotiator. I work on behalf of nurses, making their working conditions safe and idealized to the extent that I can. And before that, I worked with government employees and other workers as well. So this is what I do for a living. I think I can bring a lot of expertise to the table when it comes to teachers' voices and working with teachers, incorporating their perspectives, the union's perspectives, the classroom teachers' perspectives, and having those conversations in a respectful and inclusive manner. I will also say, and I don't believe these two things are contradictory, that the school committee's responsibility is to advocate for the students. So it is 100%, Ralph, you said that they've been receiving some pushback from the teachers union about working conditions, and that's absolutely the teachers union's job. That's what I do on behalf of the nurses. And then it's the school committee's job to push back in, sometimes it's an adversarial process, sometimes it's a collaborative process to make sure that they're advocating for the students, which is really the top priority, or should be the top priority of the school committee. If I'm elected to the school committee, I would make that process as collaborative as I can make it, while simultaneously understanding that my role may sometimes be adversarial if I felt like the teachers union didn't have the students' best interests at heart. So I hope to combine both of those things in a school committee that was a stronger advocate for children's voices.
Thank you, Ms. Hagerty. And I promise we will return to get your response on the special education question. That was my checklist. I missed the name, so my apologies. But I just want to finish this question and move to Ms. Kosiel, and you have 90 seconds.
I have a different perspective. Yeah, I'm in a union, and my union was told if we didn't go to work that we were going to go on unpaid leave. My brother and my sister just finally returned to her classroom for the first time in over a year. She's a third grade teacher in a nearby district. And I think that a way to perhaps the community would have felt more listened to is if we could somehow incorporate an MEA representative who's a non-voting member of the board so that we can understand what their concerns are in a public meeting setting. I also think that with the vaccine, hopefully a lot of their fears are allayed, and knowing how in-school spread really is not occurring. But I think, as Susanna said, when the school committee is the voice of the community and represents the community, and the union is there to represent their voice of the union. So we need to engage, and I think perhaps more transparently, I would hope more transparently in the future moving forward, to let the community understand the concerns of our educators, because we love our educators. We have amazing staff. We have in Milton, and we need to make sure that they feel respected by the community, that we're listening to their voice as well. But the role of the school committee is to advocate for the children and the families of Milton, and work hopefully collaboratively with our educators as we move forward.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Kosiel. Ms. Hegarty, I'll give you the 90 seconds to respond. Would you like me to repeat the question for you?
Please.
Sure. So the question was, what do you know about Milton's special education, and how are you planning to make better special education services across different schools in Milton?
Thank you. I learned a lot, like Miss Carol, I learned a lot about special education from the CPAC forum last week. That was really helpful to me. I don't have direct experience with special education, although my daughters did attend the integrated preschool, which was a great experience. When it comes to special education, it would be an area where I would need to consult the experts being the parents, the experts being the special education leaders, the experts being the teachers and providers themselves. But I come at it from sort of a different perspective. And I guess I would say, I guess I would ask the question, why? I would say if special education needs have increased so exponentially over the past several years, why is that? If we are identifying children of color disproportionately as in need of special education services, why is that? Is it because they actually need them more, or is it because they're being misidentified, over-identified for those services? If they need them, they should get them. If they don't, what's going on there? For children across the board, why are they needing more special education services? Are some of those increased needs a result of the mishandling of the pandemic and the fact that without being able to go to school, kids have suffered? I mean, I know my own children have had difficulties paying attention. Doesn't mean they're qualified for IEP, but it certainly has become more difficult. And I can imagine that being part of the reason for some of the increase. But if the increase is real, where is that coming from? And I would ask the same question when it came to retention of staff, which I agree with Beverly is very important in terms of consistency for the families. Why is the staff leaving? What about working in the Milton Public Schools is a dissatisfier for them? And we do this a lot in my work. And I think I would start with those two questions in terms of deciding how to move forward with special ed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Hegarty. I think my order is a little off tonight. I do apologize to the candidates. I've done 5 forums. This is the last one. I thought I could make it all the way through without a mistake. But I do realize on the last question, I did miss one of the candidates for a response. I promise to get back on order for the next one. But would just like to return to our previous question for Ms. Denny's response. Ms. Denny, would you like the question repeated again?
Yes, please.
Okay. Mr. Destin, do you mind repeating the question?
Yes. Actually, no, I don't mind. In recent months, especially, the district has received pushback from the Milton Educators Association and teachers on policy decisions regarding the reopening of schools. How do you plan to center the voices of teachers and educators, if elected, and ensure their needs are met?
Well, I think it's important to note that the members of the MEA are MPS employees, and they're part of our school community and school family. And I'm hoping that as a school committee, our relationship is more collaborative and not in a position where it's a confrontational relationship, to ensure that we balance the needs of the students we serve and our employees that are serving them. I think we should be working in partnership with the MEA, specifically around planning, as we begin to discuss how we're going to safely return in the fall in light of what we know about the pandemic and what we've learned from the research in the last year. It's something that we can do together, and it doesn't have to be a winner takes all. As Lizzie mentioned, there is a space for collaborative bargaining, but there's also a space for transparency within the guidelines of the union negotiation process. I think the teachers that we've spoken throughout this campaigning process are excited to be part of the solutions to the district, whether it's increasing recreational opportunities for students, whether it's addressing the needs of students of color in an equitable way, even when it comes to how do we create a united community in Milton so there's less animus when students get to the middle school level. I think it's important that we realize that these members of our community are just as valuable as the community members that they serve. And if we can have a non-voting seat on the school committee for our teachers, and someone representing them from the MEA, I think families will have more information to better understand what is a give and take and what's the push and pull as it relates to coming up with solutions that meet everyone's needs. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Benny. Our next question will come from Mr. Waldman of the debate team and will be first addressed to Ms. Denny. Mr. Waldman, your question.
Sorry about that. On the topic of students' voices and voting members, no Milton High School student currently holds voting powers on a decision-making body in the school district, being relegated to advisory roles on both site council and school committee. What is your stance on students having a vote on school committee, and how do you generally plan to amplify the voices of students if elected?
Well, I think it's integral that students have their voices heard as any decision is made by the school committee. As said in the second component of our platform, it's about collaborative decision making, and including students is integral to that, because ultimately they're the beneficiary of our services. There are legal reasons why students' voices aren't heard in certain decision making. For example, when the union contract is being negotiated, it would be very difficult to bring a student into those negotiations because of the time commitment and the expectations and the weight of the decisions that are made. But when it comes to decisions about recreational opportunities, the curriculum that's being chosen, anything for which there's no legal culpability for a student to provide their input, there's no reason why you cannot be included. I myself was the student representative on the school committee in my town, and it made me much more informed about the issues that the adults were wrestling with. So I'm very much for having more students in the decision-making process, but also being transparent with students when they're not, so they can better understand the reason behind those decisions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Denny. Ms. Hegarty, you have 90 seconds.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I was the student rep on the school committee in my school as well. So I know where you're coming from, and I wholeheartedly agree that student representation is really critical in moving the process forward. I also think that part of the issue and part of the reason the students feel represented is that the school committee is just out of touch with the students. I think, and I don't get me wrong, I completely agree on formal representation of the student body, the high school and even the middle school in the school committee to the extent that legality allows. But I'll also say, like, as I have worked with the school committee members, they seem to have absolutely no sense of what the students in our community want, need, or what their priorities are. And I think just by virtue of, being a parent, being involved with my children's friends, being involved with various activities, volunteering in the schools, I have a lot more realistic perspective of the students' expectations and preferences than the members of the school committee currently have expressed. So I'm in favor of that in both a formal and informal way. And transparency is one of my main goals. So I think you're absolutely right. And thanks for the question.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Hegarty. Ms. Cosio, you have 90 seconds.
So I agree. I think it's great that students, are involved in the school committee process as much as they are legally able to be involved. And I think it's truly, how you understand what's going on in the schools is by listening to the students, because they are the ones who are in there every single day and they have a lot to add. And not only does it empower them, but it gets them motivated to, if they know they can make a change, it really gives them something to work towards and a goal. So I think as much as possible, including, student advisor and the school committee is great, but also making sure that the decisions that they bring forward are things that are actually listened to and that a change is affected by the recommendations that these students make, because they are the ones in the building every day, as opposed to us, and as much as the educators and the parents deserve a role in the process, so do our students. I think, so I guess that's really all I would say. I tuned in more than I ever have to school committees this past year, as did my children. And I think it was really important that they learned, the role of community volunteers and how important the school committee is in, creating excellent schools. So I think as much as we can involve these children in those processes is really important.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Cosile. Ms. Carroll, your response?
Thanks for that great question. Bev did a really good job laying out the legal, technical reasons why it may not be completely practical to have a full voting student member of the school committee. But I really agree with my fellow candidates that it's so important to integrate student voice into our decision-making in this district. A few ideas I have about that. When Bev and I talk about creating infrastructure for incorporating more community voice into decision-making, one idea we have is to set up a series of roundtables for different stakeholders in the community. And under that umbrella would be students. And we would look to set up a sort of a regularly occurring opportunity for students to come together with members of the MPS administration, including school committee members, to share their views, questions, and concerns in a dialogue type of a format. So that's something that we would plan to implement as soon as possible. Other ideas, certainly when things are coming up that we would intend to work on, such as revising curriculum, for example, sort of creating more of a public conversation about what it could look like to have a more inclusive curriculum, partnering in that discussion with the superintendent and school leaders. Students need to be part of that conversation as well. But the most sort of poignant example that comes to mind as you're sharing that question is the recent example of Pierce students who sort of presented to the faculty at Pierce about the use of gender pronouns and to sort of help their teachers and school leaders learn and grow in an area that was important to them. That's a perfect example of the kind of way that I would like to see more and more of our educators, our district leaders listening to students to be able to best meet their needs. And just finally, the organization I work for, Facing History in Ourselves, actually student civic participation, it's at the heart of the mission of the work that we do. So this issue is personally very kind of special and important to me. And it's actually one of the things I'm most excited to work on if elected.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Our next question will come from Ms. Elaine Carroll of Milton Times and will be addressed first to Ms. Hagerty. Ms. Carroll, your next question.
How important to you are the goals of equity and inclusion in Milton Public Schools? What do you think would be reasonable progress in those areas, and how would you measure that?
Thanks. That's a great question. I think those are very important goals. I think we all do. I think most members of the Milton community thinks that those are important goals. I look at equity a little bit differently than some. I look at a broader definition of it. I don't think equity should be limited to race or sexual preference or gender identity. I think it should be equity across a broad spectrum, for instance, socioeconomic status, academic abilities, political perspectives. And I guess, as our school department works towards increasing racial equity and gender equity, I see really a troubling disconnect where we seem to be moving in the opposite direction when it comes to alternative positions politically or in terms of perspectives of families. So I really see a growing intolerance for alternative thought processes for alternative positions, and that's really troubling to me. So to me, addressing equity is across the board. The efforts that the schools are already making in terms of racial and sexual identity equity are taking a step in the right direction. But I'd also like to see that inclusivity expand to other areas of difference, so as to avoid isolating community members and students who don't necessarily fall into the same political or activist perspective as is being put forth by proponents of the traditional definition of equity. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Hegarty. Ms. Kosiel, you have 90 seconds.
Okay. So I mean, equity and inclusion are so important. And equity is coming up in all aspects of life. It's coming up at work, in our schools. I look at equity as ensuring that all children have access to an education that allows them to reach their fullest potential, both in academics, music, arts, and athletics. They all need to feel welcomed and safe when they walk into the doors of our school, and parents deserve to be heard when issues arise with their children. I will say, I don't think that equity came from an amazing preschool program called Child Study. This program benefited children in Milton Public Schools who participated as the high school teachers, but also it was an affordable preschool option for the children of Milton. I think taking away this program that allowed affordable access to early childhood education for the children of Milton creates inequities for our littlest learners. There are obvious issues regarding equity that need to be addressed, and I would never say otherwise, but I do disagree with the school committee's decision to invest $50,000 in that survey to address the equity in our district. I think we need to listen to parents and children to understand what the inequities are and where we have room to improve. And, same with inclusivity. We need to hear the people who feel excluded and listen to their voices as we move forward to affect a change.
Great, thank you. Ms. Carroll, your response?
Thanks. First of all, it's really important to get on the same page as a community about what these terms actually do mean so that we can work towards them together. And equity means recognizing the unique needs and strengths of everyone in our district, whatever their background, identity, ability, and providing them with what they need to thrive. We are so fortunate, in my opinion, to live in this uniquely diverse community. And I know that's a reason why many of us actually chose to live in Milton, of all the places we could live. But we do have persistent opportunity gaps in our achievement data here in Milton. We have, as was mentioned before, disproportionate numbers of our students of color, especially Black boys, being suspended from school, being referred into special education. And, these gaps, these disparate outcomes are just simply unacceptable. If I'm elected to school committee, I would not consider my term a success if within 3 years we haven't made measurable progress on those 3 areas of our data, which have been persistent problems over many years now. I personally am a big supporter of the school quality review. I think we can't expect to address issues if we don't understand the problems, and that's what data helps us to do. So going to our students, our families, our educators, to learn where these pain points are when we're talking about equity, that is a good thing to do. I'm glad that we're doing that. And this, topic of equity, it's a running theme throughout Bev's and my platform, because we know that it touches all areas of everything that we do in this school district. And so it's for sure a huge priority. And thank you for asking the question, Elaine.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. And Ms. Denny, your response?
Now, this is a very important question to me because this is the primary reason why I'm running. Lizzie was 100% right when she said, we need to have a common definition of equity. And I think that people misunderstand what it means when they think it's isolated to a particular demographic. It is about making sure that we meet students where they are and we get them what they need. It's just unfortunate that Milton does have a history, and we've been cited by the state for disparities in outcomes and treatment for children of color, specifically Black children. We have students that are being referred to special education at a disproportionate rate. We have students that are being disciplined at disproportionate rates, and we have students that don't feel welcome at school. While I was conducting research in order to run this campaign with Lizzie, we spoke with a parent of a special education student who shared that her child came home from school and said that they feel invisible. No child should have to leave our schools feeling that way. But until we actually understand the nature of who it's happening to and when it's happening and how it's happening, we cannot have the honest discussions with the community, with the faculty, and with the other students about what we need to change. Healthy organizations ask the people they serve, what is the quality of their service? I have seen it in corporate America at Microsoft. I've seen it in hospitals when I left having my first child, actually each child. It's important to ask people, am I doing a good job? School is more than a report card grade. School is more than fighting with teachers for the right to keep them safe. It's about creating a community where everyone feels valued and they see that you're seen and that they matter. But when we have a group of students that the demographic data on that survey will point out, there are pockets of people who don't feel that way. And if we're not honest with ourselves, we can never address that. And to Lizzie's point, if in the 3 years I'm on school committee, if I can't change outcomes for our students with special needs and our Black students who are disproportionately targeted, then I would not have done my job. And I would hope that it's not just me. Milton is an entire community. It's more than the people who serve on the school committee. So if you're not part of the solution by serving on committees, by participating in schools, by sharing your voice of support for the students who are marginalized and the families who are excluded, then you're not moving this town forward.
Great, thank you, Ms. Denny. We're moving into the final round of questions. We have just about enough time for 2 more questions before we move into our final statements. So the next question will come from the Milton High School debate team. Sorry, Mr. Destin and Mr. Wildman, to put you on the spot, but if you guys want to choose one of your final questions and submit it, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. I think we can go with our 5th question if that's cool with you, Ralph.
Yep, that works.
Cool. Guess I can just read it then. So, with the growing urgency of addressing mental health and reducing stress in schools, how can school committee policies prioritize students' emotional needs? Okay.
And this question will first be addressed to Ms. Cosile. Ms. Cosile, you have 90 seconds.
So I completely agree. The mental health impacts of this pandemic, have impacted our children significantly, and there already was a growing mental health crisis before the pandemic, and it was only exacerbated by the isolation that our children suffered. And I think that, we need to use all the tools that we can, make sure, finding ways that the children can do team building activities and, really making school a fun place that they know they feel welcomed. And that if they have problems that they can go to their teachers, the adjustment counselors, the school psychologists in order to get those supports. And we need to make sure that the funds that are, the money spent by the schools are invested in our children and making sure that those supports are there when they really, really need it. I think I had mentioned, when my daughter had cancer, my husband also had a brain tumor at the same time. And we really relied on the schools significantly for support during that time. And the adjustment counselor was wonderful in the way he supported my daughter. And as well, the principals and the school teachers just were so supportive. And we just need to make sure that every student has those supports, because this year was a challenge for all. And as we work to get these children caught up on their learning, addressing their social emotional needs and making sure that they interact with their friends and meet their peers that they were separated from, it's very important.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Cosile. Ms. Carroll, your response?
Yeah, so a few different things on this question. In the very short term, when I was talking a couple of months ago about the need to create a summer program that would be free and available to all students in the district, this district has moved forward, thankfully, with some targeted academic supports for some students. But I am interested in setting up some opportunities for social emotional connection in safe, outdoor socially distanced ways for students and virtual ways as well, for students who are looking for opportunities to kind of ease back into their relationships over the coming months, knowing the trauma of the past year, and also, just recognizing that certain members of our community have experienced different levels of trauma, and we need to be attentive to that, and we need to focus on that. We know that COVID had disproportionate impact on students of our families, people of color in this country. I would like us to look more into how that actually played out for us here in Milton to make sure that we can address those particular mental health issues. On the question of counselors, this is key. We do not have the minimal ratio of counselors for students in our secondary schools, and that is totally unacceptable. This is why we needed to be able to dip into the rainy day fund to support the addition of extra positions. So that's something we need to continue to advocate for, to make sure that students have access to a counselor in the building who can either support their needs directly or make sure that they can be referred to professionals outside of the building when that's necessary as well.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Ms. Denny, you have 90 seconds.
Well, I think it's very important to note that what we're seeing in Milton is taking place nationally. It has been a crisis all over the country, especially as it relates to young women who are socially isolated, because many boys were playing video games and were still able to engage with one another socially. But the research that Milton has conducted, actually at the bequest of members of MARC, specifically to identify what are the mental health stages our students are in, they were able to identify that we are truly in a crisis. But I think it's important that we note that Milton was very proactive at identifying A, this need, and B, putting supports in place. When my friend passed away very early on in the pandemic, my son shared it with his teacher and was immediately called back within a day by the school adjustment counselor. But to Lizzie's point, we don't have the capacity to address the mental health needs at the scale that's going to be required. Milton has been very, very thrifty by working with universities to bring in social workers and counselors as interns to help supplement our staff. But I think this is where an issue is beyond the school's responsibility. We have to recognize that as a community, that we are equally responsible for addressing the mental health needs of our children. So if we need to use our own health insurance, identify community agencies that have counselors in place, or go through our current healthcare providers to identify these resources, we can't afford to not address these needs for our students. And lastly, I would say we should utilize resources in town to provide extracurricular opportunities that show that we're understanding of the dangers of COVID, but provide small group activities especially for the younger kids, and recreational opportunities for the older students, so they have an opportunity to engage with one another in safe places.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Denny. And Ms. Hegarty, your response? You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. I have to respectfully disagree with Beverly that the Milton schools has handled the burgeoning mental health crisis well for our students, at least over the past year. I actually believe that The management of the hybrid model has exacerbated social and mental health issues for a large percentage of our student population, those who are suffering from isolation, those whose parents didn't have the luxury of helping them with their learning. And I believe that the school committee is complicit in exacerbating this crisis, if not creating it. The pandemic created it nationwide, worldwide, absolutely. But I think that our model, the model that we used, has only made things worse. So I disagree on that. I think counselors are critically important. We are absolutely below the number of counselors we should have. I recently advocated at a warrant committee meeting for the increased budget for the school committee to hire counselors in preparation for students to return to school in the fall, as opposed to the austerity budget put forth by the town administrator and the school committee. We were successful in getting that pushed to town meeting. So I hope everybody who's concerned about this issue will advocate with their town meeting member for those increased funds. I think that, though, focusing only on counselors, focusing on just getting kids in the same room is sort of a tone deaf approach. I think we need to listen to the students in terms of what they need in terms of mental health support. I don't think getting them together in a small group is going to solve serious mental health issues. And I don't think they're necessarily going to turn to the counselors, even if they're available. So I would support reaching out to the students, not in a survey, not in favor of that, but actually speaking to students and trying to solicit their input as to what they need in terms of mental and socio-emotional support from the schools. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Hegarty. Our final question this evening will come from Ms. Elaine Carroll from the Milton Times, and we'll address to Ms. Carroll first. So Ms. Carroll, your question for Ms. Carroll, please.
Has this year changed your opinion of the value of MCAS testing? And what do you see as its value going forward?
Thank you for that question. I think this year has raised additional questions on top of questions that I already had coming into this year. So I agreed with the Massachusetts Association of Superintendents, as well as the Association of School Committees and the Massachusetts Teachers Association, that it would have been the right decision to suspend the MCAS for this spring. The MCAS is not a diagnostic tool. We get the results from the MCAS in the fall. What we really need to be doing right now is investing time in nimble, formative, targeted assessments that give us individual data for each student to understand where are they, where are their needs, and therefore how can we meet those needs. Some of those assessments are ongoing now. We need to be, really investing in that. We need to be doing that through the end of this year so that we can be best prepared for next fall to meet our students where they are coming in. And to take time to be doing MCAS testing this spring is not helpful, not the best use of time.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Ms. Denny, you have 90 seconds.
No, I understand that it is important for us to assess where our students are academically in order to address the learning gaps that we anticipate. As Lizzie mentioned earlier, I advocated with MPS in order to establish a universal summer school program. I then went to find research-based studies on how they're done well and connect the district with a local expert who was part of that study, because I recognize that Milton actually has the formative assessment data to customize the learning experience for our students. But going into the fall, we realized that not everyone is going to go to these programs, and the gap may not be closed in the summer. Unfortunately, the gap that we are seeing in Milton is not unique to our town. It is national, and people recognize that in order to be able to catch our students up, for a lack of better terms, we will need to provide our teachers with the professional development necessary to differentiate instruction, but also we have to make sure that there's instructional opportunities beyond the regular school day, and thus the universal summer school program. I think any assessments that don't allow us to identify the specific needs of students number one, contribute to inequity, but also will not allow us to make the decisions that are necessary to close that gap over time.
Great, thank you, Ms. Denny. Ms. Haggerty, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. I hate MCAS and always have. So the question of whether this year has changed my opinion on MCAS is a no. I agree with Lizzie that it shouldn't have been done this year, but I really don't think it should ever be done. I think my kids spend more time being assessed than they do learning math. So I think that you want to ask how the kids are doing. You want to ask where they are. You want to find out and assess how, where the student community is. Ask the teachers. My kid's teacher could have 35 kids in her class, and she could tell you in a moment how each kid was doing, what resources they need, and where they are. So no, I don't think we need MCAS. I mean, I understand, obviously, there's state requirements. I'm not meaning to, sound like we can just put our foot down and not do it, but I do think it's a waste of time. I think it tests only how well kids take tests, which is true of most standardized tests. We've lived with them for a long time. Now colleges are moving away from SATs even apart from the pandemic. So I think as a society, we're coming to realize the futility of these tests, and I'd like to see us not waste any more time on them.
Great, thank you, Ms. Haggerty. And Ms. Kosiel, you have 90 seconds.
So I should say the only year I actually appreciated MCAS was last year, just because, teachers teach to the test. So I felt like when school ended right before MCAS was happening, that I felt pretty confident that my kids had met most of their grade level standards by the time schools ended up closing. But MCAS, I don't think, is the best way of, getting information on student achievement. And, but also I don't know how much, there's not much power that the school committee can do. I mean, parents can opt out of the test. It is, does take days away from the students' learning. But, as a school committee member, there's not much I can do. But I do know that, my children's test on MCAS, I don't really think reflects, how well my daughter does in school or where she has room for improvement. I just think it shows that she's a nervous test taker who, takes all day to take a test when the other kids take it sooner. But, as a school committee member, I think we're just kind of beholden to state standards, regardless.
Great.
And
you still have,
sorry. Yeah. And in this year, I think that there was such little learning time. The district did assessments that we were able to see where the students were at. And I think that maybe, especially once the kids are back in the classroom, I think it's unfortunate that, and still with the remote population, it's going to be hard to administer these standardized tests.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Kosiel. That concludes the forum part of this evening, and we'll move on to closing statements. The closing statements were chosen in random order. Tonight's closing statement order will start with Ms. Haggerty, we'll move to Ms. Denny, next will be Ms. Kosiel, and we'll close with Ms. Carroll. So Ms. Haggerty, you have 60 seconds for your closing statement.
I just really want to thank everybody for this. My fellow candidates and Milton Access TV and you guys from the debate team, it really is, if nothing else, the school committee campaign experience has been incredibly eye-opening to me about the community that we live in, the positives and the negatives. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be on here and talk about where I stand. And, if people agree, I hope they'll come out and vote for me. But I'm excited that we have a lot of really bright and qualified women who are interested in this challenging and unpaid role. So I appreciate all that. For me, I would just say I'm a candidate who comes to this as a parent. I'm proud of my working experience and my involvement in the Milton Public Schools, but I really just want to move forward as a school system and as a community and make sure that we maintain our excellence in educating our children. I really think that should be our top priority. We have a lot of work to do, and I'm eager to be involved if I can. And I just thank you for the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Haggerty. Ms. Denny, your closing statement.
Well, thank you all for having us, because I think it gave the Milton community an opportunity to hear what our qualifications are, as well as how we would each approach this work. I do believe that experience matters, and Lizzie and I combined will bring 30 years of experience in education reform with a track record of progressive solutions that work with districts and teachers and students all over the country that I do believe will make a difference for people who are responsible for 4,400 students, as well as the faculty that come into our schools every day. If I'm elected, along with Lizzie, we promise to focus on equity and excellence in the arts, athletics, and academics. We also promise to incorporate community voice into our decision-making, especially that of our teachers. And I also promise to work towards securing a sustainable budget that also holds ourselves accountable for the decisions that we've made. I believe that Milton is ready for this work. Lizzie and I spent several months listening to community stakeholders and getting to know the excitement they have to make Milton a better place for our students. If we're elected, we're going to bring our experience as well as our network of practitioners, of ed reformers all over this country to help our schools. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Denny. Ms. Cosio, your closing statement, please.
Okay, thank you to everyone who took the time to listen tonight, and also Milton Access for coordinating this, and the debate team in participating on your April vacation, and also Ms. Carol from the Milton Times. I enjoyed hearing from all the candidates this evening, and wish we were in person so that we could shake your hands at the end of this event. I'm dedicated to Milton and to our schools, which is why I moved back here with my family 9 years ago. As a parent, overall, my experience has been positive. If my family had an issue, it was resolved. This year was completely different and eye-opening experience. And it wasn't just my children I was advocating for. It was countless parents who saw their children suffering academically or emotionally. Some parents have felt ignored for a long time by the school committee. And only when the district needed funding was the true effects of the impact of this horrible hybrid model revealed to the public. The lack of transparency and proactive planning to get our children back for more in-person education, along with not addressing the space issues, led to some parents losing trust in the people that are in charge of our children's education. The school committee needs to rebuild that trust and proactively find solutions to address learning loss, social, emotional well-being, and overcrowding. Investments need to be focused on what is best for the children. I'm ready to take on these challenges, and we'll listen to the community when making decisions. We are a great community, and as we move forward, we need to work together to solve the issues facing our district to make sure all children reach their fullest potential in academic, the arts, and athletics. I hope I've earned your vote on April 27th, and please feel free to email me, kristenk02186@gmail.com if you have any questions. And thank you everyone for your time tonight.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Cosio. And our final closing statement will come from Ms. Carroll. Ms. Carroll, your closing statement, please.
Thank you again, Mike. And thank you to our wonderful panelists, and Bev, Kristen, and Susanna. It's really an honor to run in this campaign alongside all of you. So we can't anticipate every problem that will come up, but to find the best solutions, you need to call upon your relevant experiences, network, and skills. And Beverly and I bring that to the table. We are prepared to help lead Milton Public Schools as we seize the opportunities before us. We have so many opportunities, so many strengths to build on. So as a town and a school district, we can come out of this difficult year even stronger. I know we can do that if we invest in equity and targeted solutions for the challenges that we face. Our children are depending on us, and I know that we can move Milton forward by working together. That's the approach that I'll take. I hope that I've earned your vote along with Bev, so we can build on our school strengths and create a district where every single student succeeds. Thank you again for taking the time to listen tonight and for making your voice heard in this election. And thank you again to everybody here.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Carroll. That concludes the forum and the school committee forum for this evening. A big virtual round of applause to everyone who participated tonight. I'd like to thank the candidates, Ms. Carroll, Ms. Denny, Ms. Haggerty, and Ms. Cosio for participating. Thank you, Mr. Dustin, Mr. Waldman, and Ms. Carroll for your excellent questions this evening. I'd like to remind everyone that the annual town election is scheduled for April 27th. Please check out our website for a message from the town clerk regarding early voting and the voting process. If you have any questions at all regarding the election, your precinct location, or if you registered to vote, please contact the town clerk's office at 898-4859. As I said, this concludes the 2021 candidate forum series. All the forums for the election are available on our website. Tune in to Comcast Channel 8 on Tuesday, April 27th at 8 p.m. for the live election results. Thank you again to everyone, and thank you to the viewers at home for watching. I hope everyone has a pleasant evening.